Hello, I'm Paul. Also with me, Chantel Boyle.
Hello, good morning.
Darren Carew is the Disability Rugby Coordinator for the Welsh Rugby Union Group. Thank you for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem, Paul. And Chantal, lovely to see you as well. And it's great to be here. So in a nutshell, I'm basically like the Mr. Tumble of rugby, everything to do with inclusion or disability within our sport in Wales.
So can we start off with your disability or health condition? Can you just tell us a little bit about that, please?
I've got post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's known. I've also got a mild traumatic brain injury. So I suffer with like short and long-term memory loss there. I've got dyscalculia, which is like a form of dyslexia, but with numbers, which is acquired because of the bump on the head. And I'm also a bit of a pirate. So I'm a single below knee amputee as well. I was a career soldier in the army. I was out in Afghanistan in 2008, and we rolled over quite a big bomb, which detonated, injuring myself and two of my team. So I suffered a number of injuries there, as I previously mentioned. The amputation was something that came a little bit further down the line. So I tried to fight through and recover, but after about 5 years, I ended up electing to have my leg amputated.
Darren, that's extraordinary. Wow. And you mentioned PTSD. Can you just explain a little bit about that? It stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, doesn't it?
Yeah. PTSD is always there. It's always that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, that thing that wakes me up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, that thing that makes me quite concerned about going into built up areas or being around people. And, it's something I've had to learn to manage over a number of years now.
Was it something that was diagnosed?
Yes. Yeah.
So you had this condition, and it got to a point where you were like, I need help for this, and I need to know what it is.
Yeah, and it wasn't me that sort of prompted that whole sort of scenario. It was my wife. Once I had that diagnosis and I understood, then I went through a long period of time. I've been in treatment for over 10 years, but because I understand it and I understand my triggers and everything around it, I can manage it. I can, hopefully, fingers crossed, maintain a good lifestyle and, be good for my family, but also be productive with my work. And, but it's always there at the back of my mind, that nagging doubts, that thing that sort of pulls me down and fills me full of self-doubt.
Can I ask then, because you said it was 5 years from the accident until you decided to make the decision to have your leg amputated. Presumably the pain was so severe, that's why you opted for that.
It becomes so debilitating pain. It doesn't matter if you've got the heart of a lion. It doesn't matter who you are. Over time, it will just wear you down.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are your pain levels like?
Hey, look, in comparison to the pain I was in, it is nothing. Have I taken any major painkillers or any morphine since? No.
Darren, do you know about the hidden disability sunflower?
Oh, yes, I do.
Have you been wearing it at all, Darren? Do you use it?
Well, if you can see, it's on my ID. So this goes everywhere I go. The most challenging disabilities for me are my truly hidden ones. Even if I wasn't an amputee, that PTSD is the thing that's always there for me. I get a little bit of a break from my leg. So with more education and raising the profile and letting people understand, about what the sunflower means, even if it's something that's hung up in a, on your rear view mirror, or it's something that you're wearing, if it can challenge people's thoughts and go, oh, hang about a minute, then that just makes that individual feel a little bit better. And I like to think I'm quite a robust, tough guy, but it gets me down, so imagine what it does to others.
What does the sunflower mean to you then?
It's a means to not have to, justify or explain or prove myself to others.
Do you think the sunflower is needed in society?
Yes, definitely. From my personal experiences, 100%.
Darren, can you tell us about your role within the Welsh Rugby Union and what it entails?
I got brought in as a community coach, and I developed a schools program initially. So going into special schools across the whole of Wales, running sessions, building children's experience up, and then bringing all these schools together for a regional festival where we would run something similar to the Disability Six Nations. And, you know, then it was a case of, well, where do these kids go now? They're hooked on rugby and they know they can do it, you know. So we looked at, oh well, you know, what about after school sort of stuff? You know, what can we do on weekends? What other types of, you know, inclusive rugby formats are out there? And, you know, if you fast forward again to my, you know, my full-time role now, you know, I work with wheelchair rugby, visually impaired rugby. We've got mixed ability teams, which are rugby teams made up of people with and without disabilities across the whole of Wales, you know, and we've got inclusive community clubs for children, and we now hold Disability Six Nations in every region. And on a World Cup year, we have World Cup events, and we do loads and loads and loads of stuff. And it's been great to be part of that journey with the Welsh Rugby Union, you know, and to hopefully, you know, give them a sort of window into inclusion and how important it is, and how we should be reflective of our society, especially with the sort of brand power we have as a national governing body for the, you know, the national sport of Wales.
Where you are right now in your life sounds, you know, just really, really positive.
You know, I always say that I've done my dream job twice. You know, the first one was cemented in my sort of mind from a young age. I wanted to be a soldier. That's all I ever wanted to be, you know, and a lot of my friends now are still in the military and pursuing their careers. And, you know, like I've sort of taken a different path. You know, I've gone through a bit of a life-changing moment that, you know, and I've suffered a number of injuries off that. And, you know, on dark days, you do focus on what you've lost, but then, you know, the person I am now post-injury is completely different. I've got a real sense of purpose now, and it does fill me with energy, with drive, but a different type of drive, you know, because I want to be, I want to achieve for others.
Although, of course, you'd never have wished for this to have happened, in some ways you could argue you could have come out of it better.
I am 100% a better person, you know, for my experiences.
What advice would you have for anyone that is listening to this conversation, that's had an experience that's left them feeling like you were? I
would say, you know, I mean, it's only a moment in time. You know, I mean, you look at how my sort of story so far, how it's sort of changed from, you know, I was nailed on as a soldier and it's all I ever wanted to be. And then I had quite a severe life-changing moment. But, you know, and then I spiraled down into the like a real abyss of, you know, depression and, you know, self-loathing and, you know, no respect for myself, no belief in myself. But, you know, I rebuilt myself, you know, and I would say, like, it's really important, if you can, to utilize the support network around you. You know, like my first go-to is my wife, and my kids are my real strength as well. You know, anytime I'm feeling low, I just look at them and, you know, it just sort of motivates me. So, you know, if you've got a support network around you, you know, you're not alone. You know what I mean? You want to take that next step, get up the next day, you know, just keep moving along, and things do get better. You know, I'm speaking from my experience.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Darren. It's a wonderful example of triumph over adversity. And as you, to use your analogy of the sunflower, you well and truly have been pushed into the sunlight. You can find out more about the disability projects that Darren runs and is involved in by contacting him on Twitter. His handle is disrugbydc. The full details will be in the notes of this episode. Just finally, the NHS advised that if you or your child are experiencing problems after a traumatic experience, or if the symptoms are particularly troublesome, you should contact your GP.